Hi, my name is Noelle,
And I'm Jewell.
and we did our research on the concentration of chromium in popular liquid lipsticks, and we'd like to thank John Kay for this opportunity.
So here's a basic outline of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to talk about how chemicals in makeup are dangerous and just some basic facts about chromium. Then we're going to go on to our study and what we researched and found. And we're going to talk about the implications and what our results mean.
So, the average woman is exposed to about 168 chemicals from cosmetics, and the University of California, Berkeley did an experiment on the chemicals in makeup in 2013 where they tested 32 different lipsticks and lip glosses for metals present, and they mostly focused on lead. And in their further research, they said that more research should be done into the concentration of chromium in cosmetics, so that's why we chose our topic. And then chromium is primarily found in makeup as a pigment called chromium oxide. As you can see, the green powder, it takes a green form, and it can also be created as a byproduct.
So there are two different types of chromium 3 and chromium 6. Chromium 6 is a known carcinogen, and it can cause lung cancer through inhalation and also stomach tumors through digestion, which is why we wanted to focus on chromium, because in lipsticks you can digest some of the product on your lips. When in contact with the skin, the hexavalent form may cause ulcerations, dermatitis, and skin reactions, which is also why we wanted to focus on it, because it's on your lips. And some research has been done on the ingestion of hexavalent chromium in water, and they have certain regulations on how much you're allowed to ingest.
So we found out that the FDA has very lenient regulation on the manufacturing of the sale of cosmetics compared to European countries. They only test certain batches, so not everything that goes on the market is tested. And in Europe, there is an article that prohibits the use in cosmetic products of substances classified as carcinogenic, mutagenic, or toxic for reproduction. So their standards are much higher in Europe. And the California Department of Public Health released the final hexavalent chromium drinking water standard of 10 parts per billion, although some scientists suggest that it should be 0.02 parts per billion since this is such a toxic chemical.
So knowing all of this information, we created a research project based on these. So we came up with 4 different research questions. A broad one was, do liquid lipsticks contain chromium? And then we also decided to ask, does the chromium concentration vary by brand or by location of the product or of production? And does the price of the liquid lipstick vary in chromium concentration? And also, does the color of the liquid lipstick vary the chromium concentration?
So we would like to describe our process of digesting the samples. First, we weighed out the product, and it was between 0.1 and 0.4 grams. It didn't matter exactly how much we put because we had to dehydrate it afterward overnight, which would change the weight anyway. And then after it's dehydrated, we added 5 milliliters of concentrated nitric acid and then put it on a hot block to digest at 150 degrees Celsius for about 2 hours. And then we added 25 milliliters of distilled water to the nitric acid and filtered it through the Wattman filter paper, which filtered into these tubes, and then the substance left over was run through the ICP OES spectrometer, which would be able to find out the concentration of different metals that we tested for specifically.
So to answer our first question, if there's chromium concentration in liquid lipsticks, we found out that there is chromium concentration. So this is just an overall of what we tested. So we had a variety of different liquid lipsticks. Some were like from the drugstore and some were higher end. And we also had products that were manufactured in different countries.
And then we also tested to see if color had an effect on it, and we kept all the brands the same for this test.
So for our second question of is chromium concentration affected by the location of production, we found out that there is no statistical significance, but the EU has a lower variation on the chromium concentration. So we thought that was due to the stricter regulations, because as you can see in the US and the China, the chromium concentrations vary like really largely. So, but the EU has a lower and smaller concentrated data.
And then we also wanted to determine if the price per milliliter had any effect on the chromium concentration. And we were expecting a negative slope where the higher the price, the lower the concentration due to like better manufacturing equipment and better materials used. But our data turned out that the price per milliliter isn't statistically significant, although it did have a slight downward trend.
For our fourth question of does color or pigmentation affect chromium concentration, we found that there is statistical significance. So the reds and the lavenders have significantly more chromium concentration than pink, orange, and indigo.
And going off of that, we grouped it into the tones of the colors. So we found that cool tone colors had a higher concentration than the warmer tone colors. And we classified the warm tones as the pinks and oranges, and the cool tone as the red, indigo, and lavender. And red was classified with the cool tones because the particular red that we tested had a cooler undertone.
So we found that there was a greater variation in the products produced in China and the US than the products produced in the EU. Like I said before, likely due to the stricter regulations in the EU. And we found that there was no significant correlation between the price and the chromium concentration. But what we did find is that the cheaper lipsticks had a greater variation in chromium concentration than the more expensive products. So there was like more variation in the graph, and the more expensive products had less variation, and they had less chromium concentration.
So we found that the color of the liquid lipstick did affect the chromium concentration, with lavender containing the highest, followed by red, indigo, orange, and pink, respectively, and that the warmer tones had a lower concentration than the cooler tones.
So what does this mean for you as a buyer? When buying liquid lipsticks, you should be wary of the color, but not so much as the price or where it was located. Although you should take in mind that with a larger sample size, it may be statistically significant. And you should try to stick to warmer tones such as nudes and pinks, which have a lower chromium concentration. For further research, we want to determine the chromium, like the specific types of chromiums. So chromium 6, which if there's any presence of it, it would be like very harmful. So the ICP OES wasn't able to test the types of chromium. It was only able to test overall chromium concentration. And we also should increase our sample size for the next test.
So during this research process, we learned many things like how to solve problems quickly, because originally when we came to the lab, we found out that Iolani didn't have the technology to help us, and they didn't have a lot of the materials that we needed. So we were able to contact a professor at UH, and he allowed us to use their laboratory for free. And he helped us digest the samples since we were using concentrated nitric acid. And it was an overall good experience that allowed us to see all the hard work that goes into new research, because there are no previous methods for you to work off of. You have to just use trial and error, and you have to figure things out yourselves, like based on what worked and what didn't work. And for anyone that wants to do this next year or like this coming summer, we recommend getting started early in the summer because problems that you can't foresee may arise. And if you do get finished early in the summer, then you'll have more time to work on your presentation and your paper and not have to stress about it during the school year, which is also what we recommend, to do your paper during the summer. And then you also want to take as many trials as possible and like test as many samples as possible because that will help your data in the end to be more significant, and you can actually come to better conclusions with the larger sample size.
So we would like to thank our mentor, Dr. Ian Kusau, and also Dr. Chan for allowing us to have this opportunity. And we would like to give a special thanks to Professor Raymond Uchida and Robert Huang, who helped us to digest the samples at UH.